Buongiorno. Thank you very much for coming out on this gorgeous Saturday. You're to be commended. Welcome to Rick Steves' Travel Festival. I'm Heidi Van Sewell, and I'm going to be giving a presentation on Italy today. I just wanted to thank you again for coming, and also welcome to the venue here in Edmonds, but also to all of those who may be watching this streaming live through Rick's Facebook event. This is the first time we've done a live streaming, so welcome. I just wanted to mention a couple of things that are going on with our Europe Through the Back Door company today. We're offering 20% off of all merchandise in our shop, which is just down the street, and that's available to folks streaming live as well. When you do your online order, you can just enter festival for the promotion code to get the discounts. And those of you who are interested in booking a tour, you will also be eligible for $100 off by using the promo code FEST412. And that's available until next Saturday. So you can use that until the 21st. So I'd like to go ahead and jump into travels in Italy. And this is really geared toward independent travelers, but anyone who's going on a tour will also benefit from some of the tips and advice that I'm going to give out today in my talk. So thanks again for coming, and let's get started. Whenever you plan to take a tour or a trip to Europe, it's always a good idea to start at Rick Steves' website, because there's a plethora of information on all kinds of destinations across the continent that you can find, lots of it free. So take a look at Rick's website. I always rely heavily on the guidebooks as well. Let's see. Can we advance? Am I holding this wrong? Hello? Can you take a look and see if there's a problem with the advance? Thank you. Okay, got it, thanks. All right, so the guidebooks are invaluable because they give you all kinds of tips about how to avoid lines, how to make advanced reservations in museums and at sites where they're either required or highly recommended, how to save money at hotels, and how to find great values in dining as well. So the Italy guidebooks also offer museum walks and locally guided walking tours at your own pace. They're fantastic as a resource. So this is the itinerary, more or less, that I'm going to follow. It follows our 17-day Best of Italy itinerary, and there's plenty of opportunity to branch off and do your own thing when you're traveling independently. But it's a great, smart way to see the most that you can in the shortest amount of time. Milan is a great springboard to start your Italian adventure. It's got about a half a day's worth of sightseeing you can do, including the flamboyant Gothic Duomo. You can climb up to the rooftop for incredible views over the city center. The Galleria Vittorio Emanuele is a 4-story steel and glass 19th century shopping mall, one of the first of its kind, and it's absolutely inspiring place in which to do your haute couture shopping. There's another shot of that. A lot of people want to go to Milan to see Da Vinci's Last Supper. Be aware that reservations are mandatory, and they're kind of tricky to make. The reservations book up far in advance. So if you find yourself unable to secure a reservation for the time that you're going to be there, there are a couple of tour operators that Rick recommends at the beginning of his Milan chapter that enable you to have a walking and bus tour of the city center that guarantees entrance in to see Last Supper. So from Milan, you can make your way to Lake Como, and there Rick's favorite town is Varenna. Varenna is about an hour away from Milan by direct train, and from there you can make your home lakeside for a couple of days to get over the jet lag and to explore the charming little towns at mid-lake by boat. There are lots and lots of ferries that serve the nearby towns of Bellaggio and Menaggio and Cadenabbia, so you can explore Lake Como. absolutely breathtaking cypresses and manicured gardens. And lots of challenging hikes. When you go to Italy, you want to be sure to be in good walking condition because it is definitely hilly country, and you'll be doing a lot of stairs and lots of up and down, no matter where you go. So, say goodbye to the lakes, and we're going to make our way up into the Dolomites, but en route, we're going to stop in Verona. Verona is a great midway stop on the train line between Milan and the Dolomites. And it's famous for the hometown of Romeo and Juliet, but also for its Roman arena, which to this day is used for operas in the summertime. Verona has a great market square. It's full of fresh produce and breads and cheeses and meats, perfect to make a picnic. You can stop and see the balcony that is not Juliet's, because of course she was a fictitious character. But people still believe that if you rub the breasts of Juliet, you'll find your true love. And of course, there are lots and lots of lovers signing their eternal vows to one another in the graffiti-lined walls that precede the courtyard. Next, we are in the Dolomites, and this is just a breathtaking area of Italy that a lot of people don't really expect, because it used to be Austria before World War I. So it's a bilingual area. It's autonomously ruled, and it's very prosperous and absolutely gorgeous. We make, on our Italy tours, we make our stay for 2 nights up in Alpe di Siusi, one of the highest alpine meadows, and it's just beautiful. There are all kinds of chairlifts that lead you up into higher hikes. This is one of the hotels that we stay at. It's very chalet-like, with lots of cowbells ringing in the distance and views from every window. Very quaint family that attends to our tour members and to the guests. And they lay out huge alpine buffets, and the food is fantastic. Here's a view from one of the peaks. Just absolutely beautiful countryside. And the hikes really range from very, very easy, very moderate, and the higher you go, of course, the more difficult they get. They're very well signed, and there are lots and lots of rifugi, these little alpine huts that you can take breaks at, get some strudel, have a beer, and continue your walk. For those who are really avid hikers, you will find rifugi that you can spend the nights at. So these, of course, are only open during the summertime, and Rick lists several of them in his guidebook so that you can sort of string together a longer hike, sleeping high up in the meadows. Next, we're going to make our way to Venezia. Venice is absolutely incredible. It is the most intact medieval city in Europe. And of course, there are no streets there. The streets are canals. It's 100 islands that are laced together by about 400 bridges. And so again, here in Venice, you need to be in very good walking condition, because if you get tired out while you're sightseeing, you can't just catch a cab back to the hotel. You need to walk, so, or swim. Here you can see a shot of a couple of the boats that serve Venice's canals. You can see in the foreground a private boat. Behind it is a gondola with some passengers, and to the right is a vaporetto. You can think of a vaporetto as a bus, a city bus. And that's how a lot of people get around the city, but you can certainly stay there without getting on a boat at all, except upon arrival. Here's a shot of our group taking a vaporetto for a joyride. Vaporettos are pretty expensive. It's about €6.50 a pop. And there are 24-hour passes, there are 12-hour passes that you can get. So if you know that you're going to do something like Rick's Grand Canal Cruise, which he outlines in his guidebook, and he also has an audio tour that you can download. If you know that you're going to do that, and maybe you're going to go see the outlying islands of Murano, Burano, and Torcello for the glass and the lace and the cathedral, then be sure to group those boat trips together so that you can accomplish them within a 24-hour period and save yourself some money. So Venice is famous for its elegant decay. It really had its heyday during the Middle Ages, when it was the middleman for all the traders between the West and the East. And during the Renaissance, it was sort of, it lost its prominence because there are many other nations who were able to compete with the trade that Venice previously was so famous for. In Venice, boats accomplish everything. Here you can see a dumpster boat, garbage boat. There are market boats. Ambulances are boats. Police are boats. Taxis are boats. Everything is boats. That's why it's so very expensive to stay in Venice, because everything has to be hand-trucked to its destination. So when you're in Venice, just be prepared to experience higher prices for pretty much everything. So in Venice, it's even more important to be prepared and do your homework so that you can have an experience that doesn't completely break your travel budget. In Venice, you will get lost. It's a medieval city. There is no grid plan like the Romans did in all the other cities that they settled. So you can get a map, but it's not terribly useful. You can navigate by signs, like this one, but I know it seems kind of strange, but you have to understand that there are lots of buildings and lots of alleyways, so this sign is just indicating that you can take either alleyway, either street, and you'll still get to St. Mark's Square. And that's how we navigate in Venice. So there are several of these kinds of signs. One says San Marco. So if you're going this direction, you find the church. If you're going, you can navigate by the Rialto Bridge, or you can navigate by the Ferrovia. That's the railway, Ferrovia. So anywhere you are, no matter how lost you get, you can always navigate by the yellow signs that direct you to those 3 landmarks, and from there find your hotel. If you see cars, then you can start to panic. So St. Mark's is one of the most astonishing basilicas in Europe because it's just this hodgepodge of styles. It has Byzantine mosaics that shimmer in gold. It has Islamic elements. It's a short, warty bug taking a walk, as Mark Twain called it. And it's also has the style of ransack, because so many of the decorations that the Venetians used to embellish their church were stolen from other societies. For example, the horses that you can see right above the main portal. It's also one of the most recognizable landmarks in the city, so everyone gravitates towards St. Mark's. The interior is literally wallpapered in millions and millions and millions of teeny tiny little tesserae tiles about the size of your pinky nail that are really glass sandwiches with a sheet of gold in between. And they're cut with an uneven facet so that the light catches the gold, and they shimmer in a mystical aura to really give you the sense of the spirituality of the place you're in. The mosaics are very dimly lit most of the time, but if you get into the church around 11:30 in the mornings, you can see them all lit up. Now, the church has incredibly long lines to get in, and so Rick tells you a secret on how to skip that line, and that is to take a backpack. You're not allowed in the church with a backpack. So you're going to be directed a short distance away to a deconsecrated church to check that bag. You get a tag, and you and 3 other lucky people get to skip the line. Huh? So be sure to get to the church around 11:30 in the morning, and you can be present when they turn those lights on. The best place to be when those lights go on is the museum inside the basilica. That's the museum from where you can see the quadriga, the 4 horses that were stolen by the Venetians during the Crusades. And you can also get a view from the gallery, which is where the women used to worship. And that's the closest that you can get to the mosaics. Oh, a lot of people are worried about going to Venice during acqua alta. You know, Venice floods about 100 times a year. It's really hard to time. The most likely times for it to flood are in October and November. I say, go anyway. You know, you can never be sure if the acqua alta is going to be just a couple of centimeters or if it's going to be a couple of feet. At any rate, it only floods for a couple of hours, and you will have some of your most brilliant memories of your visit to Venice during the acqua alta. You can see maybe a couple of the people with yellow boots on. Those are sold at tobacco shops and newsstands all over the city. So if you find yourself in a flood situation and you want to remain in the city center where the floods occur, you can pick up a couple of those boots, If you're really brave, you can go barefoot. Don't recommend it. Or you can go on to the risers. And if you've never seen a traffic jam like Venice during Acqua Alta when everyone's trying to get on those risers. Another solution is to just go to another part of town. There are maps all over the city which tell you where the Acqua Alta is the worst and what neighborhoods are unaffected. So it's really not that difficult to avoid. There's another beautiful landmark, the Orologio, the clock tower, recently renovated. Venice is also famous for its glass works. Anymore, I think a lot of the works are coming from China, unfortunately, but it's still possible to get into a glass-blowing demonstration, which is free, and of course they expect you to buy something afterwards, but you're certainly not obliged. And it's an interesting 15 minutes of your time to see how traditionally glass has been blown into all these amazing, fanciful shapes. Cafe culture is very integral to Italian society. Nowhere in the country is it more expensive than in Venice. This isn't a scam. Cafe culture in Italy is such that if you stand at a bar to drink your coffee or your glass of wine, you pay a certain price. If you sit down, you're paying for the real estate. And nowhere is the real estate more expensive than in St. Mark's Square. So if your 80-cent coffee is better drunk sitting down, if you need to rest your feet, be prepared to pay at least double. But in St. Mark's Square, you can expect that same 80-cent coffee to cost around €5. And if the orchestra is playing, because there are orchestras that line the square and play throughout the day and into the evening, you can expect that same coffee to run €13. But you only have to pay that cover one time, and you get to stay as long as you like. So if you just want a quick nip, then stand at the bar. But if you really want to rest your feet and people watch and write in your journal, then consider paying for the real estate. Every bar has a listino prezzi, a price list, somewhere on the inside of the bar that tells you the difference between drinks or food consumed at the bar versus sitting down. Here, this is a cheap place. You can see that the price is only double. But when you're someplace like St. Mark's Square or maybe in Campo dei Fiori in Rome, the prices are going to be much different. Don't try to buck the system. If you buy your coffee at the bar and then you try to take it to a table to sit down, you're going to get yelled at. If you go to a table and you open the menu, the prices that are listed in the menu at the table are what you pay at the table, okay? So tipping, you don't have to tip when you are at one of these tables and you're paying for the real estate. It's understood that it's incorporated in the cost of your beverages. But just something to be aware of, because I think a lot of people get there and they're taken aback by the fact that they have this cover charge to pay. Okay, so money. Venice is going to take a lot of it. There are lots and lots of ways that you can get cash. I know people ask about traveler's checks, which we don't advocate anymore, or prepaid credit cards. The best way to pay is cold hard cash. You often get discounts in Italy, especially for hotels. It never hurts to ask, especially in this economy. If when you book your hotel, ask, is there any kind of a discount if I pay in cash? And often it can be from 5 to 10%, okay? ATMs are everywhere and they're available 24 hours a day. The reason that I don't recommend taking over US dollars or traveler's checks to exchange at a bank or at a bureau is because those places are only open limited hours a day, whereas ATMs are open 24/7. And sometimes you find that the ATMs are inside the bank. That means that there's going to be some kind of a slot that you can slide your card through so that you can access the ATM machine by yourself, conduct your transaction, and get out and not worry about somebody looking over your shoulder at your PIN number. That said, still be jealous and careful to guard your PIN number, because there are all kinds of imaginative scammers out there who will go to any lengths to steal PIN numbers and debit cards, so just be wary. PIN and chip cards, a lot of people are curious about that. In Italy, we don't have PIN and chip cards the way that you do in Britain or in other northern countries. I've never run across an ATM or a vending machine that I couldn't access because I didn't have the right kind of credit card in Italy. But generally speaking, in all the rest of Europe, you'll find those pin and chips accepted wherever there are not humans to do the transaction. For example, if you're in Paris and you want to rent one of those city bikes, you have to have the pin and chip because there's nobody there to run your credit card for you. Or if you're in Spain and you're trying to get train tickets from the train station vending machines, you need a pin and chip card. But in the case of the train tickets, you can always go to a train station window, a kiosk, and conduct your transaction with a human being. You're not going to be out. ATMs will accept debit cards and credit cards, restaurants the same. So you don't have to worry if you don't have a pin and chip card that you're going to get shut out of all transactions in Europe. Okay, the Bridge of Sighs. The Doge's Palace is one of the other landmarks of Venice that people always want to go to, and Rick outlines how to book reservations to the Secret Itineraries tour. It's only offered a couple of times in English per day, and during high season, so from say May to September, it's a good idea to book that at least a few days in advance if you want to see those rooms that aren't open to the general public. Venice is also famous for its masks and for carnival. There are lots and lots of craft shops where the artisans still make them by hand to this day. The Rialto Bridge, one of 4 bridges now that span the Grand Canal. You know, Venice is not my favorite place to dine. The seafood is, I don't care for the seafood myself. I know that there are lots of people who do, but I find Venetian food very, very expensive, and it's hard to find a good value. So I save my money and I will spend it on food when I'm in Florence, for example. And instead, in Venice, I go to these cicchetti bars. These are like tapas bars, where you can go and point to what you want, and you get these little nibbles on toothpicks or little samples of cheeses and salumi or fried artichokes and things like that. And you know what you're getting into, and you can keep a good tally in your head. And I think that it's a great way to sample local cuisine without going broke. Unfortunately, because Venice has 12 million visitors annually, there are a lot of unscrupulous restaurateurs who know that the flow of tourism isn't going to stop, and they really don't put a lot of effort into making sure that you get an authentic, delicious meal, because there's going to be somebody to replace you tomorrow. So I think that going to smaller restaurants, mom and pop restaurants, and to cicchetti bars are a way to sort of avoid that poor dining experience, of which there's no excuse in Italy. So here's a shot of another cicchetti bar. Cicchetti bars also are bars that serve wine, and the wine comes in maybe 1 or 2 ounce glasses, so you get just samples, and they're fantastic wines. The Veneto has some very, very important wines, so it's a great way to sort of introduce yourself to wines from a different region. I know most people are familiar with the Chianti and maybe Barolo or something like that, but the Veneto has Prosecco, which is Italian champagne. It has Soave, which is another great white wine. Amarone, which is one of my favorite heady, velvety red wines. And it's just a nice way to be able to sample all of these great wines, which you would otherwise have to pay a fortune for by the bottle. Venice at night costs just a little bit more. Again, that's when the orchestras are most likely to play, but there's nothing to stop you from waltzing in St. Mark's Square. Lots of people do it. Lots of people want to take gondola rides. And gentlemen, if you think that you should skip out on the gondola ride because it's 90 euros for a 45-minute ride after dark, think again. It's like missing prom. You need to take the gondola ride, but you can split it with up to 6 people. And I know that sounds unromantic, but if you can find 4 other people who are waiting in line for a gondola and negotiate the price in advance, then you can glide through those back canals and stare up at the frescoed ceilings and the Murano chandeliers and enjoy every minute of it and not feel the sting in your wallet. Okay, next we're going to head to Florence, the home of the Italian Renaissance, the birthplace of the Renaissance, and we're going to go by high-speed train. Trains in Italy now have even higher high-speed trains than the Eurostar. Now we have the Freccia Bianca and the Freccia Argento and the Freccia Rossa, and these really cut down the time that it was taking to get between Venice, Florence, and Rome and Naples. They're more expensive trains, and you do have to have a seat reservation. And what that means is that you just have to have a seat. You know, it used to be that they would sell as many tickets for a train as they could, even if that meant you had to stand for the entire voyage in the vestibule. So nowadays, you have to sit down because the trains are high speed, and they're quite comfortable, and that means that you can even book your ticket 5 minutes before the train departs, as long as there are still seats on the train available. That's all that reservation means. So you can book those through Rail Europe, which costs extra because they would mail the tickets to your house. But if you know that you're going to take this trip from Venice to Florence a couple of days in advance, then just get it when you are at the train station upon arrival, okay? So we're headed to Florence, and there's a shot of the gorgeous skyline with Brunelleschi's dome. And this dome was a marvel because it was the first time in 500 years that people could span the distance that they did with this, with Brunelleschi's dome. Brunelleschi had to go back to the ancient Romans to be able to study how they had managed to span domes back then. And during the entire Middle Ages, all of that knowledge of how to create domes and use arches for support had fallen by the wayside. And it was not until the 1500s that Brunelleschi was able to sort of give rise to the rebirth of that mathematical thinking and be able to span the distance that was needed to build that dome. There's the facade of Florence's cathedral, which is actually dating from the 1800s, not as old. And the Arno River with the Ponte Vecchio in the distance. One of the most famous landmarks of Florence is are Ghiberti's Gates of Paradise, so called by Michelangelo because they were so beautiful, he deemed them fit to be gateways to heaven. Here's a close-up, and this, it's hard to imagine today because we have all kinds of art that has succeeded Ghiberti's and Michelangelo's, but back in the Middle Ages, images were very flat and two-dimensional, and they didn't look realistic in the least. And with the Renaissance, the sort of return to classical ideals and a rediscovery of the knowledge of mathematics and learning how to use perspective again, people were able to render depth using math, and Ghiberti was able to render these figures realistically with just a couple of centimeters of bronze, and it was really a marvel in its day. So there's a shot of the baptistry doors facing the cathedral. You know, Florence is a great city for shopping. Every square seems to have something to offer. This is the Piazza della Repubblica with its itinerant scarf sellers. The city itself is also an open-air museum, and it seems like there's art or beautiful architecture on every corner. Here you can see a copy of Michelangelo's David. To the right is the Loggia dei Lanzi, which is really a sculpture museum with propagandistic sculptures, sort of giving rise to what Florence wished that they could be in the early Renaissance. There's a sculpture of the rape of the Sabine women, which is a Roman story, but the Florentines really want to tie themselves back to the ancients. Perseus slaying the Gorgon Medusa. Florence is also famous for the Uffizi Museum, and this is a typical day of tourists trying to get into the museum. Hence, the absolute necessity to have reservations. Rick lists a couple of ways to get reservations. You can book through a middleman, that costs a lot of money. You can have your hotel book it for you, but they charge about €4 or €5 for that service. You can book it directly through the website. Florence cards are sort of an all-encompassing pass that gets you into a lot of museums. It doesn't save you much money, but it enables you to skip the lines. But however you do it, don't go to Florence and try to get into the Uffizi without a reservation. The Uffizi has a brilliant layout in that it traces the history of the Renaissance from the Middle Ages all the way through the masters. So here we start with Giotto, we go into Botticelli and see the birth of Venus, or Venus on the half shell as we like to call her. Leonardo's Annunciation, so graceful, and just if you look at the lines of perspective and the convergence of the the blocks that go all the way back to the back of the painting, you can understand how he was able to render depth on a flat surface. Michelangelo, his only easel painting. Raffaele, Titian the Venetian. Florence also has an abundance of sculpture that arose out of the Renaissance. And here is one of the first bronze, nude, freestanding sculptures, the David, that really kicked things off. This is one of the winning panels of the competition that started the Renaissance. This was Ghiberti's panel, and when he won the competition among all of the masters competing at the time, he was given the commission to do the bronze doors, the gates of paradise. And a rare Michelangelo Bacchus. So the Bargello is one of the 3 top museums in Florence. So when you go, you want to book reservations at the Uffizi, the Accademia, and perhaps the Bargello Museum. But don't museum yourself out, because it's really easy to do. I once did this to my poor mother when she came to visit me, trying to show her every Madonna and Child. So be selective in the works of art and the architecture that you take in, because you can only take in so much. Italy is not one of those countries that you can go to and see everything on your first visit. You really need to take it in small doses or you'll overload. Gelato, an edible work of art. Now, gelato, many of you may not know this, but gelato has half of the fat of American ice cream and a third of the sugar. So to me, that means you can eat twice the ice cream, at least, if not 2/3 more ice cream than you would in the United States. I would recommend that you find the flavors that marry well for you, maybe pear and chocolate, or, I don't know, coconut and hazelnut, and you try them in every gelateria that you find. Because they're gonna vary, and you're gonna walk it off. Leather goods are also very popular coming out of Florence. There's a leather school at Santa Croce, and the open-air market at San Lorenzo is also very famous. There are lots of stalls there that selling various leather goods, like coats, for example. And if you don't see what you like, be aware that their shop is usually just around the corner. And if they try to lead you off, they're not going to kidnap you. They're going to show you other sizes and colors. Mercato Centrale is one of my favorite markets in Florence because of it's a food market. So upstairs they have all the produce, they have pasta, they have olive oils, they have nuts, they have porcini mushrooms, and downstairs they have the meats and the cheeses and the fish, and they have restaurant stalls where the workers eat. Anytime you see a queue of workers, you know that that's a good and economical place to eat. Florence being Michelangelo's hometown, you can see lots and lots and lots of his influence. Here are some sculptures that he created in the Cappelle Medicee that are connected to the San Lorenzo Church. This is the night and day. And of course, the David. There are a million little trinkets and statues and figurines of the David and a couple of replicas around the city, but nothing compares to seeing the David in person. Nothing. No matter how many times I go, it takes my breath away each and every time. It is absolute perfection. So there's Florence at sunset. And I wanted to mention that, you can get to most of these towns that I'm showing you by train, but on our tours we take buses, and there are also bus systems that can get you to a lot of the Tuscan villages. But if you're going around in Tuscany, it's a good idea to consider possibly renting a car too, and there are lots of rail pass combinations that combine rail travel with car rentals that you can look into with our rail department. We're going to make a quick stop in Pisa. Now, Pisa's tower is open again after many, many years of renovation and trying to secure it to make sure that it doesn't topple over. And now you can climb it, but you just have to have a reservation in advance, which you can make online. Pisa has one of the gaudiest, tackiest souvenir stalls, but Even I have a little teeny tiny leaning tower sitting on my bookshelf at home. Next, I'm going to head into the Cinque Terre, into the Riviera. Now, a lot of you are aware that the Cinque Terre had some pretty severe flooding last October, and they're really making a recovery in leaps and bounds. And Monte Rosso is open for business. Vernazza is soon to follow. There are a lot of shops and restaurants already open. But here's a shot of Vernazza as it was. They're working really hard to get ready for the tourist season. And it's just a beautiful, picturesque 5 fishing villages all along the Riviera, connected by rail, connected by trail, and connected by boat. This is Manarola, and you can see one of the boats that serve 4 of the 5 towns there in the distance. So they're pretty good-sized boats. They don't generally fill up. And the hikes are pretty strenuous, so you want to make sure that you have lots of water and you have good footwear. That doesn't mean that you have to take waffle stumpers on your trip, because those are really bulky to have in your suitcase. Just make sure you have a good, sturdy-soled walking shoe. Every once in a while when I'm on the trails, I see Italian ladies wearing high heels on these trails, because it's very important to the Italians to make a bella figura and look good, more than it is to wear waffle stompers. Or you can just relax on the beach. Monte Rosso is the only of the 5 towns that actually has a beach. There are also other towns that you can explore along the Riviera that aren't as crowded, but still have hiking trails and still have beautiful beaches and a very local feel to it. Personally, I really like Levanto, which is the town north of the Cinque Terre, and Sestri Levante is also another great option. Santa Margherita in Ligure is one of Rick's favorites outside of the Cinque Terre. That has easy access by boat and by trail to Portofino. So Ligure is one of my favorite places to eat, apart from the pesto, the green sauce made from basil and pine nuts and olive oil. I really love the cheese-filled ravioli with walnut sauce and their focaccia. Next, we're going to head back inland, and we're going to explore some of the towns in Tuscany. So the first stop is Siena, and Siena has an incredible wealth of landmarks. It's really a medieval city that was frozen in time when it lost its battle against Florence. So here you have the Piazza del Campo, the main square. It's really shaped like a scallop shell, and twice a year they pave it over with dirt, this sort of yellow dirt, which is where we get our crayon name of Siena. And they pave it with dirt, and 10 horses will run a race around this track, which is not flat, and it's not, perfectly round. I mentioned it was a scallop shell, but it's also on about a 20-degree angle, and it's very, very dangerous because the riders run bareback. And it doesn't really matter if the riders come in or not. It's the horses that count. So twice a year, they fill the square with about 10,000 spectators, and they run these 10 horses around the track 3 times. And in 90 seconds, it's about all over. But afterwards, one of those neighborhoods gets bragging rights for the entire year. In this case, it's the bruco, the caterpillar. Siena is divided into 17 neighborhoods, and 10 of those are competing in each of these horse races. And in this case, we can see the colors of bruco. Every neighborhood is decorated with the flags of its mascot and lamps, and every person who was born in that contrada gets to participate. Visitors, tourists, don't participate. They can't even be honorary members of the contrada. You have to be born there. So every year they have all kinds of processions, including the one in which all the mamas bring their babies who have just been born into that contrada out in their mascot colors, and they parade around to when they graduate into being the drum beaters and the flag wavers for their contrada. It's a very exciting time to be in Siena, and it's not limited just to the horse race periods, which are in July and August. it goes on pretty much all year round because they have various processions commemorating the previous races, or getting ready for the upcoming race, or marching out the babies or something like that. So you can often witness the processions as they go on. Siena's church is incredible too. It really rivals Florence's, if you ask me. Florence's church, while it has, Brunelleschi's dome on it, inside it's relatively empty, whereas Siena's church is really an all-star explosion of art with works by Michelangelo, Bernini, Pisano. There's the facade. It's very, very ornate, very high Gothic. And inside, you can just kind of barely see the floors that are all fenced off, because they're all intarsia floors. They're inlaid with various colors of marble and stone. And they use sort of a gratta technique, a scratching technique, to etch out the shapes and the stories, in this case of allegories and virtues and of stories from the Old Testament. There's an allegory of Siena's emblem of the she-wolf suckling the twins. Now, you may be familiar of the she-wolf suckling the twins for Rome, but it's also very important to the Sienese to ally themselves as closely as possible with more ancient history than what they have. So for the Sienese, their legend is that sons of Romulus and Remus founded Siena. So they too get to take part in this even older legend of the she-wolf suckling the twins that we'll see later in Rome. Another city that you might want to visit that's easily accessible from Florence by public bus, as is Siena, is San Gimignano. San Gimignano is a medieval town too that's very famous because it still has 17 towers rising from the city houses. And these towers were very important in the Middle Ages because not just did they serve a purpose. The people from San Gimignano were famous for their cloth production, in particular of the saffron color that they would get from the crocus flowers. So they would produce saffron cloth, and the longer the cloth, the more money they could get for it. And you can't just hang it out on a line to dry. You have to have some place where it can stay out of the wind so that it's blowing up against buildings and whatnot, but also give it a place to dry so that the dye will set. So if you've got a tower house, you can hang it inside. But you can also use a tower house to escape from your enemies. And during the Middle Ages, it was very common to have the sorts of feuds that we read about in Romeo and Juliet. And you can see the flags here that are very similar to the ones that we saw in Siena. A lot of these hill towns in Tuscany and in Umbria have the same kinds of medieval festivals that Siena celebrates. So don't limit your visits just to Siena to see those kinds of festivals going on. You can email or call up the tourist information offices in the towns that you think you might want to attend and find out what kind of festivals are going on there. The Rick Steves guidebooks list the contact information for those offices so that you can find out about any kind of special events going on during the time you'll visit. So here is one of the tower houses in San Gimignano. And again, you need to be in good walking condition because there are lots and lots of stairs, ramps, hills that you will want to climb for the views that you get in these hill towns. And of course, the shopping. In Tuscany, of course, they're famous for their wine, but also for the wild boar called cinghiale. You can find this in ragu, in sauces. You can find it braised. It's served with all kinds of pasta, pappardelle. It's dried into salumi, and it's a great specialty to sample while you're there. Strozzapreti. Every region has its own specialty pastas. And the hill towns were very famous for their battles with the papacy during the Middle Ages. So this kind of pasta is named for the garrote that people would use to strangle the priests who would come by to extort tithes from the people. It's called strozzapreti. And olive oils. Tuscany and Umbria have some of the finest olive oils in the country, and they're well worth seeking out. And olive oils that you can get at a fraction of the cost of what you would pay for a good olive oil here in the United States. And luckily, since 9/11, the industry has met consumer demand, and they now produce the olive in steel tins that you can pack in your suitcase and not worry about it shattering on the way home. And ceramics. You see lots and lots of different ceramics, and every town has their own special design. You can go to artisan shops and see the works being drawn up by hand by ladies and gentlemen who've been working at the trade for years and years. The landscape is what draws a lot of people to Tuscany and Umbria, and it's definitely breathtaking. You can see long, lonely lanes that are lined with cypresses and the farmhouse villas out in the countryside. This is in Umbria, and you can see the vines, the vineyards, crisscrossing in the foreground. Our next stop is Orvieto, which is really one of the most important towns in Umbria. Umbria is just south of Tuscany, and it's not as frequented as Tuscany is, so it's less expensive, and you can find a lot of the same types of things that people seek out in Tuscany. So that's wine, it's great food, landscape, olive oil, ceramics, and lots of vistas. So here is the cathedral in Orvieto, and it's very much high Gothic, like the one that we saw in Siena. It has a great market that takes place on Thursdays and Saturdays, and lots of little spots all around town where you can have a nice picnic. Again, in addition to being fit, physically able to do the walking on your trip, it doesn't mean you have to be able to run a marathon, but just be prepared for the stairs and the hills. But you also really want to pack light. And this is something that, after working with Rick for 12 years, I've really embraced. Keep in mind that you're not going to deepest, darkest Africa. There are lots and lots of places where you can do laundry, lots of places where you can buy toiletries if you run out. So don't feel like you have to pack 14 outfits for a 2-week trip. As a guide, I pack the same size bag for a 3-month trip as I do for a 2-week trip. And every day, every 7 to 10 days, I just plan to do laundry. And I'm a very lazy laundress. And I know that the washing machines in Italy are very, very efficient, and so I pop my clothes into the washing machine and I go and check my email at the cyber cafe, or I'll go and have a glass of wine, or write in my journal, or run another errand, and I come back in 25 minutes, my clothes are wrung out and clean, and I just take them back to my hotel and hang them up. You can hang them up on the hangers that are provided in your armoire, in your closet. A lot of people take the clothesline that Rick sells in his store. You can take that too. And within 12 to 24 hours, your clothes are going to be completely dry. So the climate is working on your side. But just expect that you'll have the opportunity to do laundry at some point during your trip, and pack accordingly. Expect the best case scenario. You can always pick up extra supplies if you need. So I'm packing light. Heading off to an agriturismo. There are lots and lots of farmhouses around Italy that are subsidized by the government to remain family-owned farms and offer hotel service or restaurant service to tourists too. And it's a win-win situation because tourists get to see how actual farms function, and they get to sample the goods that are produced on that farm, whether it's wine or olive oil or pork, for example. Some of the amenities are very, very nice, and some are very rustic. It just kind of depends on what kind of inn you choose. We have a lot of listings in the Rick Steves Florence and Tuscany guidebook, as well as the Italy guidebook, and every agriturismo's website is going to tell you what they offer. Some of them have cooking classes, some of them are very basic, some will have bicycles that you can borrow or rent, and some have minimums of a week that you have to rent them in. And generally that's during high season, so if you're to go in low season, you may not find the pool open, but you might be able to stay just for 2 nights. A lot of them have cooking classes, which I love to take in because they just make making pasta seem like opening a can of soup. They do it so fast, so dexterously, and the results are so amazing. Nothing is quite as relaxing as sitting out in the middle of the countryside and just enjoying a great meal and kicking your feet up in the middle of Tuscany. It offers a great laundry opportunity. And if you're really lucky and you're going in the fall, you may actually get to help out with a harvest. So around mid-August to late October, depending on what part of the country you're in, and depending on what kind of grapes are used for the wine there, you may be able to help out or at least observe them harvesting for the wine. A lot of the wineries around Tuscany and Umbria have tastings that they offer. So you can sample the various products. Here we are at Tenuta Le Velette, which is Cecilia Bottai's winery in Orvieto. And they produce about 8 or 9 different award-winning wines, and we get to sample them, paired with the foods that they are intended to be eaten with. It's really important for the Italians to marry well the food with the wines. So here we have onion pizzas and cheese breads and salumi and sweets. Cecilia's winery is very, very unique in that it's built over the top of Etruscan catacombs. So there's these long, like mile-long tunnels below her house that are ideal, have the ideal conditions, the ideal temperature and humidity for storing wine. And that's where they put their bottles for fun. Huh? So every year they produce, hundreds of thousands of bottles of wine, and, maybe 1,000 of them will go into this basement, into this catacomb. And every once in a while, when they feel like it, they open a couple of bottles and see how they taste. Nice. From Orvieto, you can take public buses to Civittà di Bagnoregio. One year, we rented a moped and drove over, and that was a lot of fun too. So you can rent mopeds in Orvieto, but you can take public school buses over to Civittà di Bagnoregio, and this is Rick's favorite hill town. It's called the Città che muore, the dying city, because it really only has 15 residents. Huh? It used to have a much more solid path to Bagnoregio, which is the town on the mainland. You can see that this is way up on some kind of a mesa, on a mesa of tufa, which is a very soft and yet strong volcanic stone. But a lot of it has eroded away, so now they just have this man-made trail. It used to look like this. Now it looks like this. Really pretty much the same, but a little bit more erosion. But as you can see, at the very end, it gets pretty steep. I mean, it's really only about a 5 to 7 minute walk, but the last 3 minutes are pretty steep. So you want to be in good shape to be able to enjoy that walk. And once you get over there, the views are amazing. There are all kinds of bougainvillea and flower-bedecked balconies. A lot of the homes have been snapped up by city folk who have them as sort of a vacation home. The Baroque church is still the same. They used to have palio races in the city square with donkeys. This is Sandro. He's responsible for the 16th citizen. He and his wife just had a baby, so hopefully the population is rising again, but I'm not keeping my hopes up. But Sandro owns one of the cafes there, and it's a 1,500-year-old olive press, the kind that you would hook donkeys up to the millstone and run them around so that they would mash the olives into paste, and then they'd squeeze out the oil. Well, today he hosts travelers in his olive oil cellar, and he makes them fresh bruschetta over the flames using the olive oil that his family produces down in the valley with modern techniques today, but still, it's still in the family. Now we're going to head down to Rome, and Rome is incredible. Rome is breathtaking. Rome can frazzle people. I think a lot of people have a difficult time with Rome because they've been sort of breezing through Tuscany and Umbria and relaxing and taking everything easy, and then they get to the city and it's jarring because it's busy. And because the distances are great and the buildings are huge, and people, I think, overexert themselves. Rome is where you really need to take it easy and embrace the siesta way of life. Huh? So, for the first-time visitor to Rome, Rick really recommends that you concentrate yourself on 2 facets of the city, the ancient city and the Vatican City. So we're going to start at the Colosseum, and the Colosseum can have mobs and mobs of people. You can pick up a ticket for the Colosseum that includes Palatine Hill and the Roman National Museum at any of those 3 museums, and it enables you to skip the lines at the others. So the smart thing to do if you plan to visit the Colosseum is to buy it at the National Museum or at the Palatine Hill and then just walk right past the lines at the Colosseum. This is a short line. Now keep in mind that a lot of people are waiting in line not just to buy tickets, but also to get their bags searched, because you have to go through airport-style security to get into a lot of the sites nowadays. So it's a good idea to leave your Swiss Army knife back at the hotel. Here's Francesca. She's one of our amazing local guides. She guides for a lot of the Rick Steves tours, but she's also available to hire on an individual basis, but she's really, really in high demand, so it's hard to get her. But she can hook you up with one of her colleagues, who are very good as well. Rick lists a lot of local tour operators at the beginning of the Rome book, or at the beginning of the Rome chapter of his Italy guidebook, so that when you're there and you want to just hit the highlights of town, but you don't want to book a fully guided 17-day tour, you can just hire a local guide for the needs, to meet your own needs. Now, the Colosseum has recently opened its underground tour. So in addition to going in, paying your admission to go in, you can also purchase a private tour, well, semi-private. You and 25 other strangers will be able to go into the underground sort of labyrinth where the animals and the gladiators would have waited before they were pulled up onto the arena stage and compelled to fight. And that's about 25 euros per person for that tour. And there are several companies that offer that tour, and you can find them online just by Googling Colosseum Underground. It's a very new service that has just cropped up this last fall. So the next stop on your ancient city wanderings is going to be the Forum. You can visit the Forum, you can visit Palatine Hill, but I think of the two, the Forum sparks people's imagination the most. And I think it's the most famous and it's the most recognizable. So I would, unless you are really, really crazy for all kinds of ancient ruins, I would focus on the Colosseum and the Forum first before hitting Palatine Hill. The Forum has 3 of these commemorative victory arches that the generals would award themselves every time they were able to conquer a foreign land. This one in particular is very important because it commemorates Constantine's battle for the Milvian Bridge. And Constantine, of course, was the emperor who legalized Christianity, really turning the tides on the fate of Christianity. Before the 4th century, it was really just a small sect. And afterwards, when people were allowed to be Christians and weren't persecuted at that time, that would come later as well. Christianity was really able to build up momentum and become the force that it did. Here's some other commemorative bridges, arches. This one is the Arch of Titus, which commemorates the battle at Masada. And there you can see the menorah, which was one of the spoils that the Romans got. And the Basilica of Constantine and Maxentius, these buildings are humongous, and it's so hard to understand how an ancient civilization would be able to do this without any modern means of technology. It's really incredible. When we look at the Forum, it's sad to see all these little fragments, but the thing to keep in mind is that throughout the centuries, people would go down to the Forum and they would just remove stones to build their houses, or realize that 250 wagon loads of stone was removed from the Colosseum to build St. Peter's Basilica. What's incredible is that there's anything left at all. This is a square called Campidoglio Square, and it was designed by Michelangelo, and it really tops Capitol Hill in Rome. Here you can see the mayor's office, and on the back side of that is the Forum. And in the center is a replica of a statue, an equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius. And there is the original that's now indoors and protected from pollution, air pollution, and acid rain. This is the only equestrian statue of a Roman general that was not melted down or destroyed, because the Christians, later, when they found this sculpture, they thought that it was Constantine because of his beard. But in fact, it was Marcus Aurelius that they found out later, and luckily it didn't get melted down, so we have this today. And there is the ubiquitous symbol of Rome, the she-wolf suckling the twins that we saw back in Siena. This is an emblem that you see all over the city, on manhole covers, on pedestals. And this particular sculpture is now believed to have originated during the 8th century and not going all the way back to the ancient world, but still it's very near and dear to the Romans' hearts. And it represents the twins who were suckled by a she-wolf, which is a metaphor for a prostitute. And the twins were abandoned, left to die. And when they grew up, having survived being suckled by the she-wolf, the prostitute, one of them killed the other. Romulus killed Remus and became the founder of the city of Rome in 753 BC. These are some of the sculptures and works that are found in the Capitoline museums, which are a great museum to take in if you want to learn more about the ancient city and its founding story. There's just some beautiful, beautiful sculpture and marble casts of ancient rites and rituals. Here we can see the sacrificial bull right behind the flautist. And this is the Victor Emmanuel Monument. The Romans hate this monument. They call it the typewriter or the wedding cake. I was always very impressed by it because as an American, I'm used to seeing, buildings that are 50 years old. This is only from the 1800s, the late 1800s at that. So it's very new. It's an upstart. And it's meant to look ancient, but of course to the Romans, it looks nothing of the sort. But it was really a gaudy addition to the city landscape to commemorate the unification of Italy in the 1860s. Now it has an elevator that takes you all the way up to the top, and it's really sort of the city center. I mean, it's the belly button of Rome, practically. It's really it's a hub from which you can see all over the city. So now you can take the elevator up to the top and get a bird's eye view over the center. Here's the Pantheon, and the Pantheon is a very important building because it was the building that Brunelleschi based his studies on how to build the Florentine dome, on Brunelleschi's dome in Florence. He studied the Pantheon and learned how to span the distance of the Florentine church in order to build that dome. And this is a very important structure too because it's the only ancient building that has remained in continuous use since it was created in the 1st century after Christ. The interior is also remarkable because it's not that white marble that we've come to expect that Rome looked like in the ancient days. We watch Gladiator and we think, oh, all of ancient Rome was just this beautiful, brilliant, white, sterile marble, and it wasn't. The ancient empire was able to get marble from all over, from the Middle East, from Africa, and it was able to use all of these different colored marbles to create sort of a technicolor splash of an interior in the Pantheon. And it's really incredible to go in and see all of the different colors and imagine that that's what the entire city must have looked like at one point. The Pantheon is also remarkable because it has the highest column. It's a 44-meter column that goes right up to the ceiling, and it's open to the sky, so when it rains inside the Pantheon. Rome also has an incredible array of fountain squares, all these wonderful open places. Italy is blessed with a great climate, and people's apartments are very, very small. An 800 square foot apartment is huge for Italians. So their apartments are very, very small, and it's not the kind of place where you would want to invite friends over for a drink before dinner or to socialize. No, you go out to the squares. So the squares in the city are open living rooms. People are intended to go there to socialize, and they're made very beautiful so that people want to linger. This is Piazza Navona, and its centerpiece is Bernini's Four Rivers Fountain. And it's a place that people gather not just in the daytime to see the artists and the street performers and the musicians, but they come at night to seduce one another and to have a gelato and to have pre-dinner drinks and just to see and be seen. Here's a shot of the Pantheon at night, another great gathering place with lots of little cafes and restaurants ringing the square. Trevi Fountain, the famous fountain that you can throw 3 coins into over your shoulder and be sure to return to the city. Now we're going to look at the Vatican City. And Vatican City is, of course, comprised of the Basilica of St. Peter, as well as the Vatican museums. We're going to start at the museums. Now keep in mind that the museums are 4 miles of galleries, apartments, and exhibits. So you really need to pace yourself and just hit the highlights. You can go from Egyptians to ancient Greeks. This sculpture is the Laocoon, which was unearthed around the early 1500s and marched through the town proudly. Michelangelo saw it and immediately altered his style of sculpting to really take on the dynamics of motion in marble. Every single room, every surface in the Vatican Museum is ornately decorated. We have Raphael's paintings in the Raphael apartments, and culminating in the Sistine Chapel. You could spend hours in the Sistine Chapel, but it's cram-packed. It's very, very busy. There are benches all along the sides so that you can sit and really take some time to admire Michelangelo's masterpieces. One tip that we have for visitors to Italy is that you take some kind of a mirror. And so when you're looking at church ceilings, because so often the artwork, the best work is on the ceilings, rather than craning your neck up like this for as long as you want to look, you can just stare down at your lap and look at the mirror. It seems a little bit silly to pack for just, the few things that you might want to see, but I think it's really important if you're planning to go to the Sistine Chapel or any other ceiling view like that. Venice is also very important. It has a lot of works on the ceilings. The Last Judgment. In the 23 years or so that passed between Michelangelo painting the ceiling and him painting The Last Judgment, the entire tenor of Rome had changed. We went from the Renaissance, the high Renaissance, where there was optimism and there was a humanist spirit, to the Counter-Reformation. The church was in crisis. Rome had been sacked by mercenary soldiers from Germany, and people were very scared. And that, I think, was the feeling that inspired Michelangelo's dark vision of painting The Last Judgment. There's no hope in this painting at all. Even the Virgin shies away from Jesus as he raises his hand with no mercy. And the whole painting is just this maelstrom of despair. When you go to St. Peter's Basilica, be prepared for lots of lines. You'll have to go through airport-style security again. If you have bags, even this size, you'll be required to check them. You can see the people over at the far right of this shot. That's where you check your bags. That's also where you get into queue if you plan to climb the dome. You may not have bare shoulders or bare knees, and I don't think that it's worth even risking. If you're going to go all the way to St. Peter's, don't even take the chance and have a skirt that comes just to your knees. You just never know if you're going to get a cranky guard. So be sure to have either a shawl that you can drape over your shoulders or some zip-on pants, or scoot your skirt down past your hips a little bit so that your knees are covered, but don't take a chance because they're very, very strict at the Vatican. The Swiss Guard are not the ones who are going to stop you. If they were, it might be worth it just to get into a conversation with one, but it's the Vatican police that will stop you at the doors. So the Swiss Guard are supposed to be a very elite secret service to the Pope, created by Julius II, who was also the Pope, to really drive this desire for to collect art by the popes, by the church. And they've been serving the Pope ever since. Once you get inside, the church itself is dazzling. It holds 60,000 worshipers. And everything inside is intended to reduce your feeling. It's intended to not make you realize how enormous everything is. So the sculptures that are closest to the floor are 6 feet tall, and the ones up above are 15 feet tall, and the ones way at the top are 21 feet tall. So they all really look like the same size, and you don't realize that the height of the building is about a football field in length. And it's just breathtaking. The decoration, the ostentation of the church is truly amazing. Of course, you have highlights like Michelangelo's Pietà, the baldacchino made by Gian Lorenzo Bernini. And just to climb up to the roof and see the entire square, also designed by Gian Lorenzo Bernini, and it's supposed to represent two arms, the arms of the church embracing the faithful. It's very, very spiritual. The last thing that I would encourage you to see in Rome, if you have the time, is to go to the Galleria Borghese. This is located in the Villa Borghese, which is really a huge park, as well as a house and museum on the outskirts of the city. And this used to just be a party house. People didn't even live there. It was just sort of a place to throw parties. And today it's the museum containing some of Gian Lorenzo Bernini's most famous sculptures, as well as other works of art like Caravaggio and Titian and Raffaele. But reservations are mandatory, and they are 2 hours. So that's the maximum amount of time that you can be in the museum. If you want to be in for longer than that, you have to book two visits. And I would recommend that if you do want to go to this museum, that you visit first the paintings on the upper floor, because everyone goes to the sculptures first. That way, when they're done visiting the sculptures and they head upstairs to the paintings, you get to have the floor more to yourself. I won't say that it's all to yourself, but it's a lot less crowded. So book those in advance using ticketeria.it, which is also in Rick's guidebook, and do that at least a week in advance, and you can have your pick of times. They're in 2-hour intervals. This is the last shot of St. Peter's at sunset. And I just want to remind you that if you decide to book a Rick Steves tour, that you get $100 off. And that if you decide to purchase any merchandise at the shop around the corner, that everything is 20% off. And if you have any questions, I will be over at the Travel Center in just a few minutes. And thank you so much for coming out today. And thanks for streaming live, too.